With the premiere of the Halo TV show's second season this week on February 8th, I've made the decision to finally watch and review the series. This review is structured into two main parts. The first part, which you are currently watching, is recorded before I've seen any episodes. In this section, I'll share my initial thoughts on the show and explain why I postponed watching it for almost 2 years. I'm also going to touch on some potential spoilers, specifically information presented in trailers or official communications from 343 before the first episode aired, as well as some story content from the books or games that influenced my expectations in the show. Once I've watched all the episodes, I'll come back and assess whether or not any of my initial thoughts have evolved. Now, the primary reason that I postponed watching the show for so long was the existence of the Silver Timeline, and my stance remains unchanged. I wish the Silver Timeline just didn't exist. While we can accept minor changes for different mediums, making fundamental alterations to the storyline risks breaking the narrative. One particular concern stems from something shown in the trailer: the presence of a human raised on a Covenant ship. And this is a major contradiction to established Halo lore, where the Covenant treated humans as enemies and just opened fire on human ships. If humanity is not considered vermin, then it's puzzling why the war against humanity even occurred in the first place, instead of getting an invitation to join the Covenant like every other species. Yes, there were wars with some of those species, but they still got an invitation. There's never been this conversation with humanity. This further raises questions about whether humans are still reclaimers, and if they are, whether the prophets even know. If they don't, it's a significant plot hole based on the established Halo lore. It is possible that the show explains this in an acceptable manner, but when you start making fundamental changes to the storyline, you risk breaking the entire storyline and nothing makes sense anymore. And that was my concern. Other worries include humanity's apparent familiarity with Forerunner technology and the intentional journey to the Halo ring. This leads to questions about the events of Reach and Cortana's curiosity about certain coordinates that led them to discover the ring in the first place. Even seemingly small changes like these raise numerous questions about the storyline's continuity from the original Halo game. But that wraps up my pre-series thoughts. Despite my reservations, I've decided to give the series an honest chance. In the next segment, I'm going to discuss the series after watching the entire season. I just finished the first season of the Halo TV show, and I'm honestly pretty conflicted. Before talking about that, this is going to be heavy on spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled and want to watch it for yourself, I'm going to pause for a few seconds so you can close this video and watch it later. So first, let's focus on the positives. And it wasn't as bad as I feared it was going to be, which I acknowledge is not exactly high praise. With the exception of one episode, which I'll talk a little more on later, I enjoyed what I was watching. The acting was good, the CGI, which was weird in a couple of places, was largely impressive. And while I have some issues with the core storyline, I do feel like it captured a lot of what I enjoyed about Halo, particularly its combat sequences. Something that I really enjoyed was the exploration of the insurrectionists, something that is largely ignored in the games, and I feel like has not really been explored much after the start of the Covenant War. There were also the references to the games, which sometimes felt a little weird, but for the most part, I felt like they were thoughtfully done, like the Chief wielding a heavy turret, the shield regen sound, and referencing the iconic "this cave is not a natural formation." It didn't break the narrative by having these nice nods, but in different contexts. I did also really enjoy seeing the politics of the UNSC, something that the games never really explored. The games painted the UNSC largely as a cohesive entity, which just isn't realistic. And that isn't a fault of the games. They wouldn't have the time to do that, so it is nice to see that here, even if the politics may not be the storyline that I had exactly hoped for. However, that is also where things started to fall apart for me. While in the beginning I enjoyed the exploration of the insurrectionists, it eventually started to feel like filler. It never really felt like it was going anywhere, and there was no real conclusion at the end of how it impacts the events of Halo. We even got a full episode that was only the insurrectionists. If I had not been watching to make this video, I likely would have stopped that episode and not finished the season. On a 9-episode season, none of them should feel like filler episodes. Then we have all of the changes that came along with the Silver Timeline. I went into this thinking that there were just a couple changes here or there with the artifact, But as I watched the series, it became clear that entire personalities were changed. Some decisions and events were changed with no real justification to why. And I'm left with more questions than answers when comparing it to the main timeline. As I had mentioned before, my primary concern was about the human raised on the Covenant ship. It turned out that not only is she raised, but she is a blessed one by the prophets. It is ultimately explained that they are using her and have no intention of allowing her to complete the Great Journey. The only reason they kept her was that they needed someone to activate the artifacts. So they were not exactly contradicting the important part of the lore, but it does raise a question on how the rest of the Covenant think about this. They were taught to see humans as vermin, the Master Chief as a demon, but there's this blessed one human on high charity? That should raise conflict within the Covenant, or even doubt, but that's never explored. As part of learning more about her, we also learned that not all humans are blessed one, people who can interact with the artifact. It is unclear at this time if this series has a concept of reclaimers, and if there is a distinction between that and the blessed one. But now there is also a genetic difference between those that can interface with the artifacts and those that cannot. With artifacts and the blessed one, they're also seemingly adding a mystical element to Halo. We have John getting obsessed with the object and constantly drawing it as a kid. The woman from the Covenant ship can somehow feel something about the artifact, even though it is no longer there. And they seem to both share a vision of Halo, even though only one is interacting with the artifact. We even saw another piece of this with the witches and seemingly magic. Like I mentioned earlier, this was shown in the interactionist focused episode, and I almost stopped watching. So I lost interest and I might have missed some details. But Halo is science fiction, and while it doesn't explain everything like Star Trek, it doesn't have magic like Star Wars. Everything about this changes the genre of Halo, and it just doesn't fit. I also have significant concerns about how certain characters are portrayed in the series, particularly Dr. Halsey. She is changed from this character that is driven but devoted to humanity, that has an almost motherly attitude towards her Spartans, someone that will do questionably ethical things, but for the right reasons, to someone that is self serving, views humanity as broken, and doesn't care who she hurts along the way. Take, for example, that in the series, the Spartans had their memories wiped when they were kidnapped, so they don't remember their childhood. In the books, she made a point that the kids deserved the truth, that they were going to be put through hell and deserved to know why. And similar to this is when she made Cortana. Instead of what I had assumed in the book when she flash cloned her brain only, in the series, she flash cloned her entire self. She even had a conversation with her clone about her clone being killed. And then for some reason, the clone had to be alive during the operation in, frankly, an unnecessarily gruesome scene. And by the way, Cortana is now the Cortana system, which can control the body of Chief and shut him down entirely, literally taking over his mind. I just I just did not see any justification for why there is such a major change in her personality. She was already driven, and to enough of a fault to throw ethics out the window. But she didn't need to be made cold. Going back to the Spartan's memory being wiped, this brings me to my biggest problem with the series. Changes that don't have any story reason to be made. The memory wiping seemed to serve two purposes. First was a lot of screen time dedicated to that drama, but it never really went anywhere. It just happened a lot. The second was to hide the convenient fact that Master Chief had seen the second artifact as a kid. It just wasn't a good plot device because they never explained why it needed to happen in the first place. It just did, and we have to accept that. And if we didn't have the Halo books showing the opposite, then sure. But we already had that established storyline. And going back to Cortana, the show seemed to imply that the way Cortana was made was unique, by using the brain of someone to make an AI. Yet, in the books, AIs are not common, but the technology is well understood, and all AI, or at least humanoid AI, is made by using the brain of a dead person. What made Cortana unique was that she was a smart AI instead of a dumb one, and that she came from a clone of Dr. Hazley's brain. But there are other smart AIs. In the show, we never saw another AI. There was one that was very briefly mentioned, but in the way that she was discussed, she might have been the first with a humanoid figure. As the season concluded, not only have we not set foot on the iconic Halo ring, what the show is named after, but we still don't even know where it is. And it makes me wonder where the series is going. I mean, we don't even have a hint yet to what the Halo ring's true purpose is. So, does the Flood even exist? I would have liked some hint that they are actually building to what Halo is. I acknowledge that they had to spend some time doing world building. Starting right after Slipstream from Reach would likely not have worked as well as it did in the first Halo game. But we didn't need 9 episodes of it. And we could have very least got us to the ring. Maybe done some of what we saw as flashbacks. To conclude, I still don't know how I feel about the series. Had I watched this not as a Halo fan, I likely would have enjoyed it more. And maybe that was their intention. My criticisms are mostly due to it compared to the storyline I already know and love. But there were just far more changes than I would have liked, and many of them just don't make sense. But I did still enjoy watching it for the most part. And while I can't say I'm super excited to watch season 2, I am going to, and I will hope that it is better. They are now a bit stuck, needing to stick with some of the decisions that they already made. They can't go back and retroactively change season 1. I hope that we get a payoff for the insurrectionist plotline. I hope that we can drop the mystical element and bring it at least somewhat closer to what Halo really is. I know it can't be 100% thanks to the Silver timeline, but it can be so much closer than it currently is. Also, because I know that a lot of people were upset about this. For the record, the Chief taking off his helmet was not one of the problems with this series. And I think that part was a good decision, given the events that we saw the Chief in. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this series and whether or not you're looking forward to season 2. Thank you so much for watching.